Greetings once more with the oral history microphone. We're visiting this time with Leon Riley. Now, everybody's heard of Leon Riley Ford. Well, here's the man in person. Leon, thanks for granting us an interview.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mofield. It was my pleasure to do it. I appreciate you coming down and discussing with me things.
You've been in Florida.
In the wintertime, we spend the winter in Florida. We came back, time to go to the Kentucky Derby each year, usually.
Well, you may not have heard the program, but we start off and ask you your birthday.
I was born in May the 30th, 1913.
So you're past 70.
I'll be 72 next week.
Therefore eligible to be interviewed, which our deadline is 65. Now, you were born, George Latham told me, in around Golo.
Golo, in Graves County, right.
That's just barely over the line from Brewers, though.
It's half a mile from the Marshall-Callaway County line.
Mm-hmm. Now, your father's name was?
A.C. Riley. He was a Baptist minister, my father was.
Mm-hmm. And your mother?
Mother was Lucretia James. I have always claimed kin to Jesse and Frank, but she said that wasn't true. She wouldn't.
Well, now there's something I didn't know. We're learning something. Do you remember the grandparents on either side?
Yes. My grandfather Riley was Andrew Jackson Riley, and my great-grandfather Riley, his will is recorded up at the courthouse in Marshall County, and he came here from Virginia, I believe, and settled in Marshall County back in 1800 on 200 acres of land, which was then Callaway County, I think I'm correct. Now it's a corner of Marshall up against Callaway and Graves.
Mm-hmm.
And he willed this 100 acres to each one of his sons, Franklin Riley and Andrew Jackson, which was my grandfather.
You can tell the period in which he lived, named after President Jackson.
That's right. That's right.
Well, since you were born around Golo, I assume you went to one-room grade school, maybe?
Went to Golo University, I call it. It was really, the correct name was Cope Schoolhouse. Yeah, it was eight grades all went to one room. You know, we'd go up on that long bench up front, and each class was called.
Oh, that's right.
And
I graduated from a one-room school myself, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
I don't know if I ever graduated or not. I guess I did, because when I went to high school, which I didn't go much, we had to take an examination, which might be a good idea now.
That's right.
From the 8th grade, went to Mayfield High School and took an examination to see if we were qualified for high school. That's the way you got into high school. It wasn't your age or how many years you had gone.
Do you remember any of the teachers you may have had?
Yeah, I remember my first teacher was Mr. Ed Crockett. He was from over in Graves County, and he finally ran a store at Golo for a while. Then he ran a store in Clear Springs when he passed away, and I believe he was on the school board of Graves County at one time. Then Bridget Darrington was my teacher, which last time I talked to her, she was in Ohio. And Cromer Arnott from Glen Grove.
Oh, I knew Cromer Arnott. Yes.
He was my teacher at one time.
Principal at various places around. He was in Ballard County, I think, when he retired. What were some of the things they did in those one-room schools that you think were good? Did you see anything good about them? A lot of people look back at that now and they say, well, it was all bad. The teacher had 8 grades, but you learned a great deal, didn't you?
Well, I hope I did. I learned how to read and write.
And that's more than some do in 1985.
Right. And I did learn the multiplication table. That was the hardest thing I think I had to do. And I could figure, and I think that you're right, that some of their kids now can't even read or write.
Well, I've always said that I really knew the 8th grade when I got out of it, because I'd been through it 8 different years. You'd heard it all every time, from the first all the way through. And they'd go up to, the teacher would say something like, 6th grade arithmetic will pass up to the front. And you went up to the bench and sat there and recited or did whatever needed to be done at the time. And that gave you really some public speaking experience, didn't it?
Sure did. And I found out early in life, I was about the 6th grade, I guess. You should pay attention to the teacher when you're up on the front reciting your class. She asked me a question one time, how Columbus got to America. I didn't know what she said, and Wilson Fleming was sitting next to me. I said, what did she say? And he said, tell her he rode a mule. And I said, he rode a mule, and I almost got kicked out of school. She wanted to know where he got to. So you should pay attention to those teachers.
Well, that's a real great story. I'm glad we got that recorded for posterity here. Did they have any spelling bees? Or?
Oh, yeah. But I was not a very good speller. I don't know. My mother was, but I don't know. I still can't spell very well.
I always hated arithmetic. I was a good speller. In fact, I won the school spelling contest once. But I'll tell you how I learned the multiplication table. When we would misbehave a bit, which I frequently did,
Yeah.
laugh out loud or something, the teacher would make us memorize certain parts of the multiplication table. So I learned that thing till I know it forwards and backwards up through 12 at least.
Well, I learned that quite early in life. I'm pretty good in mathematics for somebody that didn't have much education, but I just can't spell. That's the reason I can't write very well. When I'm writing and I get the word I don't know how to spell it, I just scribble it out, you know.
Now, your dad was a Baptist preacher.
That's right.
Did he live on a farm?
I lived on a farm when I can first remember. And in fact, we lost our farm in 1932 or 3, I guess. It was sold at the courthouse doors. Then when my father passed away, he was pastor out at New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church in Marshall County, 1948.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, back when I was a kid growing up, the preachers, you know, they got paid with chickens and a gallon of molasses, and it's unusual. People now can't believe it. I remember one time, for example, that he was pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church in Carlisle County, and he went down Saturday afternoon, Saturday night, and Sunday preaching, and he got 95 cents for the weekend.
He took the whole collection.
The whole collection, 95 cents. And we worked next week to pay enough money to get the gas to pay for the trip. He had to buy it on a credit to go down there. So those preachers in those days didn't make much money.
Far different from many of them today, at least. I'm sure there's some that don't make an awful lot even today, but some of them I see on television are making millions.
Seems like they get a pretty good income anyway.
Yeah. Well, since you lived on this farm, did you ever sucker any tobacco?
Sure, I suckered tobacco, and I cut sprouts and bushes and cinnamon sprouts and suckered tobacco. That's the reason I don't like to mow the yard. My wife can't understand why I don't like to work in the yard. I said I cut all that stuff I wanted to when I was a kid. We hoed tobacco and thinned corn. I've never understood why you planted corn twice as thick as it should be and go along and cut half of it out. But that was part of our job. And the last crop of tobacco I grew, I was about 19 years old. And it brought me $28.55 a total crop. I said, well, I may starve to death. It won't be raising tobacco, and I quit. And that's the year that we lost our farm. And then Dad moved on down in Grays County at Folsomdale. And I got a job driving a truck. I got $1 a day, so I was getting paid. Worked about 6 months and got laid off because the man wasn't making any money on the truck, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So things.
You do have to make a profit in business to keep going.
If you keep going, you have to. So he decided he'd drive it himself. He couldn't afford to hire me for $6 a week.
Well, now, somewhere down the road you got married. Tell us about your wife.
Well, I might ought to tell you how I met her. After I lost this job, I got a job driving a peddling truck up in Callaway County. And I met my wife peddling groceries down through the country road when you carry, they call them hucksters back in those days. Mm-hmm. And that's how I met her. And
so you were a peddler.
I was a peddler. That's what they used to call me, peddler.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for the rest of the year until December. Then I'd met my wife, and we were wanting to get married. So I got laid off of that job at $1 a day and couldn't find another job. So I decided to go out, but let's go to Detroit and get rich. Mm-hmm. And I took off to Detroit. And get out of a morning, you know, you'd stand in that snow and ice of trying to get the employment line. And the last 6 cents I had, I put it in a streetcar over in Highland Park, trying to get over to the east side. And in Detroit, and I was wanting to come home. And I went down to Don Harper at this Kentucky pool room, and I had an old car worth about $10. And there's a bunch of boys from Kentucky the same shape I was in. And I said, now, if you boys get the gasoline, I've got the car. We'll go back where we can get beans and cornbread and sweet milk. I know we can eat.
Yeah.
And I wish I could recall the name of the ones that came back with us, 5 of them, and it cost them $1.50 apiece to buy the gas. So we came back from Detroit for $7.90, and I furnished the car. And I can't think of their names. I know a few of them, but I won't try to name them.
Uh-huh. So not everything was rosy by going off to Detroit. Not everybody got a job.
I didn't ever get a job.
I wonder what kind of method they used in sorting these people. They just kind of looked at you and said yes or no?
Well, I think maybe there would be maybe 1,000 people out there, and they might hire 6 that morning. So the other 94 went back home. They just wasn't hiring it.
Now, they didn't do, as personnel departments do today, give you a battery of written tests and so on. I've heard they just kind of looked at you, and the guy said, well, I like your looks. Okay, you're hired.
Well, I never did get that far along. See, he went by, when he was sitting up in a little booth, you just walked by.
Mm-hmm.
And if he liked the looks of it, he'd say, you go inside. But I never did get that far along. And then I assume they gave you some kind of a test. I don't know.
After you got
inside. They might take 10 people out of the line that day to interview. But I didn't get inside. I don't know what they did.
That's not a very scientific way to hire people, though.
No,
Jim Solomon.
No, they didn't.
Jim Solomon, line 9.
Well, let's see. All right, you came back home, and you'd been wanting to get married before you left.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's wanting to get married, but I couldn't support her. So I got a job selling wherever aluminum. My aunt in Paducah had bought some, so she got me a job knocking on doors. And that was when I started working in Paducah and Mayfield. And I made a little money, so by June we got up enough courage to get married. And
I've heard that you did fairly well at that.
Well, I didn't starve. I stayed with them. I was a salesman for a year, then I was supervisor for 3 years. And then Beverly came along, our oldest daughter. And the nearest we ever come starving to death, I guess, was we was up in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, when the 37 flood came along. And of course, if I sold, I got a little money. If I didn't sell, I didn't get any. And we had to buy Dexter Maltose for Beverly as a formula for the food, and I got sick. I didn't have enough money to buy enough to feed my baby, so I went down to Roy Stewart. I'll never forget, he was a mechanic. So I borrowed $5 from him to buy enough food for Beverly to eat while she was about 6 months old.
And of course, while Paducah was flooded, there were no homes that could buy any cookware.
Well, see, we was in Poplar Bluff, Missouri at that time, but we couldn't get home. My mother and father could have fed us if we could got back across the river. But see, it was about 2 weeks we was over there and we couldn't get home. But, you know, it was all fun. We had a gas apartment, and we had one of those old-fashioned stoves made out of stovepipe, you know, thin. Well, we never did get enough money to get the gas turned on, so we had Robbie cooked on the top of that stove. She did all of her cooking. We never did get the gas turned on all the time we were there. It only cost $10. I never get $10. And I would go down on Saturday, and you could buy a pickup load of pine knots come out of Ozark Mountain Sea for $1.
Those little thin stoves would get red in a hurry.
That's right. Well, that's what we hit the apartment with, was pine knots. It cost me $1 a week to heat it. It is, we laugh about it a lot now, but we looked like we were going to starve, but we didn't. We made it okay.
Yeah.
Beverly grew up to be a good size, so we didn't have to worry about that.
Now, you've mentioned Beverly. How many children did you have?
2, Beverly, and which married Jim Solomon, and Marcia Gale that married Ross Pyle he's from Oklahoma.
They live in Oklahoma now?
They live in Oklahoma now. He's farming a rancher out in Oklahoma.
Do you have any grandchildren?
Oh, yeah, we got 2 boys and 2 girls. Beverly and Jim have 2 boys, Todd and John Solomon, and Marcia has 2 girls, is Andrew Gale and Allison. In Oklahoma, we have 2 girls.
Well, what did you do next? Or maybe I could ask you, didn't you go with Jim Kinney sometime or other along in there?
That was later years. We came back to Marshall County, and, well, I was living in Lone Oak, and you're acquainted with the J.C. Chester Stewart Brewers, Kentucky. You know, Mr. Chester had passed away, and his estate had come up for sale, the store had. And we came back to Marshall County and talked to Guy Chester, which was his son, and worked out a deal. I bought the J.C. Chester store at that time. That was April the 9th in 1938. And Robbie was pregnant then with Marcia, see, and I had a Studebaker car. We wasn't really the richest people in the world. And we went to Bank of Murray, and I borrowed $1,000 from George Hart. Took 5 men on my note to get $1,000. And we came to Brewers, and that's when we started business in Marshall County in 1938. Mm-hmm. And we've been in Marshall County business till I retired.
You had a general merchandise grocery type?
We sold hardware and groceries, shoes, clothes, just a general store. You know, back in those days, everybody, well, they had one in Hardin, Davenport, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And that's what we sold till we stayed there 10 years. We came to Benton in 1948, and then I went in partners with Jim Kinney and Lopus Hyatt in the Ford business.
Well, let's get back to Brewers a little bit more here. Was there a post office there?
Yeah, there's a post office there. It was, I was always accused of moving a post office. We moved.
You were the postmaster then.
I was the postmaster at the time, right? It was really funny. And we built a new store about 300 yards from the old one. And I had talked to a few people about it. They didn't care where the post office was, so I just moved it out into the new building, which was on my property, and this was on the Chester property. And the next day I got a telegram from Washington that they understood I had moved to the United States Post Office.
Without authority.
Without any authority, would I please return it to its original place? So maybe I could go down in history of moving to the United States Post Office. You can do that, you know.
Yeah.
I put it in the tow sack, and Eddie Rule carried it up and down the road for me. So I moved it twice in 2 days. And with quite a bit of experience. And, you know, while we were at Brewers, as you remember, is when McCoy Terry came there the same time I did. And that's when Brewers got on the map as a basketball team, and we went on and won the state championship in 1948. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I guess we were younger, but, you know, some of the best days of our life were at Brewers, and some of the best friends we have are still there. Mm-hmm. It's all we've had close ties all these years. And
wasn't George Latham from out in there somewhere?
Well, we don't let anybody know that. He really came from Golo. George would like to be from Brewers, but he graduated at Brewers. I just kidding you.
Yeah.
He went to school at Brewers where he graduated.
Uh-huh.
But he was born at Golo, same place I was.
Well, that rascal never told me.
He didn't tell you that?
No.
Yeah. We grew up at Golo, you know.
All right, we've rapidly getting down to where we have only about 10 more minutes of time. I want to get you in the automobile business somewhere or other, because my first new car was purchased from you and Jim Kinney, if I remember. Well, I know it was 1949 model. And cars at first were scarce.
Yeah, they were. That's right after the war.
So I'd signed up for a car, and finally I wanted a 4-door V8 with overdrive.
With overdrive.
Super deluxe.
And then you went to the 6-cylinder with overdrive.
Yeah.
I think I sold you 7 of those, wasn't it?
Oh, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know how many it was for sure. But
There's a lot. Every one of them just alike. You want a 6-cylinder with overdrive.
yeah.
We had a lot of fun those days.
Well, now, how did you get to be a dealer on your own?
Well, Jim and Lopez and I were partners for 6 years. Then in 1954, we dissolved partnerships, and they kept the Ford dealership, and I went to used car business. We had this used car lot up on North Main Street here. Then I was in used car business until 56. Then I signed up with Lincoln Mercury, and I became a Lincoln Mercury dealer here. Mm-hmm. And then 57s and 58s, if you remember those years, you couldn't keep them running. Of course, Latham was my service manager, but you could fix them on the day and they'd be bad off tomorrow. Then 57, about the time I was starving to death again, they dumped Edsel on me. I got to be an Edsel dealer for about a year. But I lived through that all right. And
you were up on Main Street about 7th or 8th or along in there?
708 Main Street. It's where Wink's place is now, up on Main Street. Mm-hmm. Then Lopez came down and built this place at the north part where the Leon Riley Ford Inc. is today. And, you know, he had from a heart attack and had some ulcers, and we bought the Ford dealership out in 1967. At that time, my son-in-law, Jim Solomon, had come back, and had been with me then, and he and George had bought part of the corporation. Then we made a deal with Lopus and bought this place, and we combined and dualed the Lincoln Mercury and the Ford dealership together. And that's how we got it all together. And then we went in the farm implement business and tractors, and Houston Smith was the manager of that for about.
Now there's another brewer's boy.
That's another brewer.
You know, my wife's first job was teaching school at Brewers.
Is that right? Well, if she taught Houston, she had a problem.
He was in the class.
Is that right? Well, I feel sorry for Jamie. Yeah, Houston was the equipment manager for years. And he and I have been close friends for years and years. In fact, his father and I were close friends. I've known Houston all his life. His nice family. And he's a good businessman. He handled the tractor part of it. So we had all three lines of Ford for, I guess, 10 years. I don't really know exactly how long.
Farm implement dealers of all kinds, and even the major companies, have been having a rough way to go in the past few years, I noticed.
Been terrible. And in fact, the farmers are having a rough way to go.
That's right. So many of them are being sold at the courthouse door now.
And you know, I went through that when I was 19 years old. I saw our farm sold at the courthouse door, and that's a sad feeling, really, Dr. Mofield. People haven't gone through that, don't realize it. And it isn't any fault of anybody except the fact that you can't produce, well, you take wheat, for example. Now it's $3.20 to 30 cents a bushel. And a combine's $80,000. A tractor costs you $50 to $60. And I remember several years ago, a combine was $2,000, and wheat was $2.50 a bushel then. And something's going to have to be done if we save these American farmers. And maybe some of them overextend it, like people do. But yet, you can't produce wheat for $3 a bushel.
No.
Now, we're either going to have to do something in this country, in my opinion, or we're going to let the other countries make our farm equipment, make our cars and their food, and ship it all over here, and we're going to sit here, and I don't know what's going to happen to us.
Well, if the farmers go, we think we've had problems because of farm surplus, but what would it be if we had farm shortages?
That's right. You look on your television, these people are starving to death around the world, and we got stuff going to waste. That doesn't make sense to me, really. And sometimes I wonder, and I'm not a politician, as you know, that if we send these people food instead of sending them guns to kill each other with, if we wouldn't be doing a better job as Americans. I don't know if we would. I'm just saying that is a good thought, I think, that we should consider
Well,
that.
it sounds reasonable to me.
Because I don't think that anybody ought to starve to death in this country as much food as we've got.
All right, you did well, and you eventually, I don't know much about the corporation now, but when you retired, was another person brought in?
Yeah, when I retired, I sold the stock to Jim and George Latham owned part of the stock, and I sold the rest of it to Jim and Mac Tucker, that Mac's a partner in the corporation now. And I sold completely out of the corporation. I don't have anything to do with the business, except any more than anybody else interested in their children. And when I completely retired, I got out of it. I never could, halfway do things. I always wanted to go all the way, or I didn't want to
Either in or out, yeah.
I always said there's three ways to do everything, and that's the right way and the wrong way and my way. So I had to get out.
I remember hearing a story similar to that in World War II, the right way and the Army way.
That's right.
So.
But I had further success or not. I had a young fellow ask me last week what you would contribute success to. I don't really know. I know that God has blessed Robbie and me and blessed our family in good health. I'm in good health now, and I don't think you can get through life without the blessings. If God don't bless you, you're in trouble. And I contribute a lot of it to that. And I found out, people, in fact, some of my own family tells me how lucky I am. And I have made one, always felt, and I still say, I can look back over my life, and the harder I worked, the luckier I got. I've always found that helps.
Yeah. Well, could you tell us a little bit about Benton when you first came here? How has it changed since then?
Well, since I moved here, it's changed very little, as you know, really. down this side of the railroad track has developed. When I first came to Benton, when I was a little boy, you know, you had to go down to the well on the east toward the radio station to get a drink of water. There wasn't any water in Benton, and it's changed. And I think that Benton's made a lot of progress. And of course, we got the banks. We got 2 and 3 here in Benton now, I believe. One recently came in. It was changed the valley to a bank, and then we got 2 in Calvert City. And it's almost unbelievable that 20 years ago that the banks were, well, I don't know what the total would be, but I would say maybe 20 million. Now we're talking about over 200 million in deposits in Marshall County. And
I believe one of the banks, Bank of Marshall County, I think it maybe is 100 million.
I think Bank of Benton, I believe, is 83 million.
They're up close to 100 million.
And the 2 at Calvert City are,
combine them all, it'd be what, 125 million or more?
well, it'd be 225 or more, 250.
250. Yeah, including the savings and loans
Right.
and so forth.
Would be more than that. It'd be probably 300 million because see the Bank of Marshall County, the Bank of Benton would be 200 million.
Mm-hmm.
Then the banks of Calvert, I don't know their size, but I'd say you got nearly 50 million probably.
And we've, well, since I've been here, the radio station has come along.
Long ways. And the radio station's been one of the biggest assets we've had. And you know, and a friend of yours and mine, Shelby McCallum, I think has done a lot more for Marshall County than people even realize in Marshall County, because I know of a lot of things that we have in another part of Marshall County I think is the grandest thing we have, to tell you the truth about it, and that's in your line of work, and that's our school system. You know, with all the criticism that Reed Condor gets sometimes, which I think is some of it is not at all justified, that he's done an outstanding job in Marshall County in our school system. Maybe he shouldn't have all the credit, but after all, he's he's the top man on the totem pole, if you want to put it that way.
I think we've been very fortunate, just as you do apparently. I think Holland Rose did a good job.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
In his time, and so the county's been fortunate in having good people.
Well, see, they're the only 2 I remember. Of course, Holland Rose started it, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the first time. When he came to Marshall County, he was our superintendent. And by the way, he was a Brewers boy, too, I believe. I know his wife's from Brewers.
Uh-huh.
And I think that he did an outstanding job in starting the thing. And then Mr. Condor came along and has worked hard, and he's used a good business judgment. And I think we need more people in offices that spend tax money wisely. You know, it's easy to spend somebody else's money, but I think we have taken the tax monies of Marshall County and progressed. And I don't know of a county any place our school system is as good as it is in Marshall County. People that visit me here can't believe when they go out to high school and see what we've got out there.
What we have. Well, we're down to just about a minute and a half. Do you have any kind of story you'd like to leave us with? So your most embarrassing moment or the funniest thing that ever happened to you besides selling the post office?
Well,
I mean moving the post office.
Doctor, many things happen to me that it's almost, I can't think of. I think of one thing that always is funny. I shouldn't say this on the air. I hope you don't put this on the radio, but George Long used to get a kick out of it. I told it one night at the Lions Club. We lived at Brewers, and our youngest daughter was about 4 years old. And of course, I've already said my father was a Baptist preacher, and he had lived at Grand Rivers at that time. And they came by going to Mayfield. I'd gone up to the house. We lived at the Meta Mathis place. I went up to have lunch, and Robbie said, your daddy came by this morning, and he's going to be back this afternoon. And she said, you got a case of beer out there on the back porch. You better hide it. And so about the time she got through telling me, I got up, heard the car coming up the hill. And it so happened it was empty, but I don't know what caused it to get empty. It was. So I grabbed it and started down the basement with it. But Marcia was about 3 or 4 years old. And when Dad opened the door, she grabbed him around the neck and she said, Papa Riley, you better hurry if you want some beer. I said, Daddy's hiding it. And you can imagine what he told me about it.
With that, we'll have to sign off for today. This is Ray Mofield thanking Leon Riley for a wonderful interview, and we return you now to our studio.